Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to talk about connection. It seems that in our culture, nature has somehow become separate from humanity, and this needs to change. Connection is what brings us back together. And here I'm talking about both our connection to nature and to each other. Today's guest is Laurie King, author, coach, facilitator, Ph.D. student, and adventurer from the United Kingdom, and she has a passion for rewilding people and the planet. Laurie has spent her lifetime both studying the wild and experiencing it directly through her own adventures in it. Laurie is committed to sharing and teaching her passions with others, and she's discovered that her gifts center around this connection. Most recently, together with Miriam Lancewood from episode 88, she compiled the new book, Wilder Journeys, which brings together dozens of writings from some truly outstanding adventurers. I'm incredibly grateful because Laurie and Miriam have introduced me to many of the authors in this book who you've already heard from on this podcast, and there's much more to come. Laurie's here to share her own journey and how she came to collaborate with such an incredible group of people through a connection to nature. Laurie, welcome to the campfire.
Oh, hi, Scott. Thanks so much for welcoming me on the show. It's really nice to be talking to someone with such a similar interest and passion.
We do, bringing people together to share their adventure stories. It's incredible. It is incredible. So, Laurie, for the context of the listeners, could we just start and could I ask you to just kind of share an overview of the work you do and where you do it?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm based in the UK, so that's where I do most of my work. In particular, at the moment, I live in Gloucestershire, and that's a part of the southwest of England. And basically, I work at the intersection of personal development and wilderness living and skills. So I am training in wilderness therapeutic practice, and I'm currently running workshops here in Stroud called Wild Wellbeing workshops. And the aim of these workshops are to get people to connect with themselves, each other, but most importantly, the environment outside, and receive the sort of messages that come when you connect with your intuition, surrounded by the beautiful natural world. Also, I am a writer, as you have explained, and I was pulling together recently all the stories that are now published in the volume Wilder Journeys, and they're stories of self-transformation in the outdoors, in the wilderness, because I feel like, as you share this passion, Scott, I feel that when people go on amazing self-transformative experiences, especially in the wilderness, they often come back, and without being able to have a platform to tell their story, they often go back into the way they were before. But having a platform for storytelling is a really powerful way of cementing any transformations you've made. So even within the workshops, I follow this same format, and people go off on a solo, supported by the guides, and then they come back and they tell their stories of transformation. And I guess the book is a really similar theme to that. So yeah, workshop guide and writer and editor is my sort of main thing that I'm talking about here. Although I also am doing a PhD at the moment, and that's all about people's connection with plants and other wild foods, and the different ways that people care for other species, whether that be through a kind of conservation agenda or a foraging agenda, and really talking about the kind of effective emotional encounters that come from our participation in the modern human world.
Yeah. And I'm going to plug the book here because it is so good. I've read many of the excerpts and I've had the opportunity to speak with some of the writers. It is truly like transformative stories. And they're really, I mean, there's some wow adventure stories in there too. Some really breathtaking experiences that people have had. So I really, really recommend the book. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I want to note, like, this is not a job for you. This is a passion for you. Can you just talk a little bit about that passion?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's something I think I've known from a very young age. I grew up in an urban environment, and I was always fascinated by the outdoors and going on walks and yeah, about how things grew. And I really enjoyed gardening with my dad when I was growing up. But it was actually school teenage years that I really got into the kind of sense of adventure and the resilience that comes from that when I joined a group called the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yeah. Cool.
It's a large national program that happens here in the UK that gets young adults outdoors doing expeditions, but also volunteering in their community and things like that. And that was the first time I'd been camping. And yeah, learning to navigate and being on our own and trusted to be on our own in the outdoors in the wilderness. And I think that was a really formative experience. And it actually is there's an interesting statistic. I can't remember the exact figures, but it's basically if you've had a really good experience in the outdoors when you're a teenager, I think it's under 14, then you're so much more likely to be caring about the planet and also wanting to go out on adventures when you're in your adult life. And I think I just got there just in time,
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Having that amazing formative experience with my peer group that really sort of changed the way that I lived my life. And I just thought, wow, I don't want to just be living a kind of indoor urban life. I have so much to learn about the natural world, and you can only really learn that through participating and exploring and being out there and being curious.
Yeah. Can I ask you about that? Because you're the first person, just being from the US, I'd not heard of the Duke and Edinburgh Award before. I wonder if you could just, for my listeners, talk a little bit about that and how you came into that.
Well, it was actually my friends at school started the program before I did. So I think you start when you're about 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And that you do it. There's several different awards. There's bronze, there's silver, and there's gold. And for each of the awards, you have to do a certain length expedition, which is like carrying all your own gear and camping and walking and navigating. And you also do community service and what are the other elements? Learning a skill.
Okay.
You have to kind of accumulate a certain amount of hours on those things and get it signed off and everything. So it's very official and bureaucratic. But that's kind of, you learn that that's also how to get a qualification or that sort of thing. But yeah, I started, I think, when I was 14, and I did all three of the awards. And for me, I saw my friends doing it and I thought, oh, actually, that seems something that I would like to do too. And when I began doing it, I was just like absolutely in my element. And I hadn't, I suppose, really found the thing I really loved at school. I mean, I really enjoyed art and writing and French and drama, but I hadn't really found the thing that I was really passionate about actually until I went on that adventure on the first expedition, and I was just like, wow.
Yeah. And so where did you go on your first expedition?
It was actually not too far away from where I lived. I think it was a 2-day with maybe one overnight on the first one. In the local Gloucestershire hills around where I lived. And then we went further afield for the next ones.
Yeah, but you got a taste.
Got a taste of adventure, exactly.
Yeah. So you said you were in your element. That's what your words were. What did that feel like?
Felt just liberating, and I felt free, and I felt I've always just really enjoyed not having a phone constantly, not having mirrors around, not having TV screens, just being able to connect with yourself, with each other, and with the environment. Having, seeing different landscapes, seeing different species. I mean, for me, that's just such a sense of aliveness that comes from that, which, I didn't know how to access before I'd been on that experience.
Yeah. So what happened when you got back from that?
Well, I think I felt a sense of achievement in a way of like,
Yeah.
oh wow, I can do this thing, and I have access to that at any time. I now know how to navigate, and I know how to put up a tent, and I can keep myself safe. I know what equipment to take with me, and there was a real sense of kind of confidence that came from that. And the feeling you get when you're carrying all you need on your back, your food, your tent, your shelter, and all of the things that you need. It's just, for me, that's the feeling of freedom.
Yeah, I love it. It's the feeling of freedom, but I love it's that self-confidence. It's that sort of like, I can do it. And especially at a young age, I think it's so important. So did it also come with a craving or a desire for more?
Absolutely, yes. But it also came with a desire for exploring more of the world, and as a result, I ended up choosing to study social anthropology at university, because that for me seemed like a way to learn about the world while also getting a degree. One way of doing it would have just been to walk the world, which one of the authors of Wilder Journeys has done, and I've many times thought to myself, I would just love to just wake up every day and just walk.
Yeah.
And walking's really, really my thing. So to read someone's story that has actually spent a large portion of her life just walking is really inspiring for me. But anyway, my way of learning about the world was to go to university and study anthropology, and so that's what I did. But in the holidays and times between studying, I went to university in Scotland, so I was out in the Scottish mountains, hitchhiking, wild camping, and that was a big part of my sort of university experience as well.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. Yeah. So what I really love about your journey is it's this really nice blend of like academic study, but also the direct experience. And I guess I wonder if you could kind of talk us through like sort of that blend.
Yeah. I think I've always sought balance in that, because I do find that I'm someone that really likes studying, and I get a lot from the kind of stimulation of concepts. Like I've got a very conceptual brain. So I think that's also how I came up with the Wilder Journeys concept, is that's just how I function, and I can see themes and draw them together. And I just really like the buzz I get from doing that. I also love learning and reading about other cultures, and particularly it was always an interest for me how other cultures relate to the world around them historically and in the present, and the kind of all the complexity around that in the present times, and also about healing practices and different ways that communities are working therapeutically with either the natural world or with the spiritual element or modern medicine, you name it. There was a curiosity around that. So I always want to keep learning about those things and challenging myself to, I think, be even more open-minded and just sort of curious about how different people's worldviews are and how their brains work. And then, but I've always tried to balance that with practical experience. So even while I was a student, I spent 50% of my time studying anthropology and 50% of the time being an environmental activist. And that was going out and organizing campaigns, but also organizing a food cooperative and showing films about our relationship to the natural world and how it's actually, there's damage that has happened as a result of certain ways that we live our lives and how certain corporations are functioning. So that was, I suppose, the balance I struck at that point in my life.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I'm doing a PhD, and it's about a practical topic, which is foraging, and the complexity around sustainable foraging. And at the same time, I'm foraging myself because it's a passion of mine. And I'm also training in wilderness therapeutic practices. And that's a very practice-based course as well. Learning bushcraft and ancestral skills and cordage making and that. So yeah, I think even while doing, quite intense academic work, I still always want to be keeping my feet on the ground in some ways.
Yeah. So something that I'm super interested in, because I love reading books, but there's also this element of like, I have to go try myself. Like it can't just be all academic knowledge. And this is what I see like with you is this, this thirst for knowledge. But then I'm wondering like how like that when you get out in nature, how it kind of brings that academic aspect together. Because there are people in this world that are purely academic. There's people in this world that are purely experiential. But for you, and I think for me, like we bring these things together. It's important to me that they come together. So I'm just curious how like the direct experience for you has helped you sort of bring that academic knowledge to life.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say that experiential knowledge is worth so much, and it helps make a theory into something much more meaningful. So for instance, I did study anthropology and I studied Andean language and culture at university, and I was fascinated by the way that communities in the Andes related to the world around them and the other animals and the mountains. And then I decided after I finished my degree to actually go there and spend time in those lands and with those people. And then I could see also the complexity around it. It's easy to kind of make something seem quite black and white, or maybe that's the wrong phrase, but it seems like it's one way, and then you go there and it's actually way more complex than you thought, but also you see it in some ways living and breathing, and it brings it to life. It brings it really to life.
Yeah. And you said you went there, but you went there for a good chunk of time.
Yeah, I went there for 6 months, and I spent time with anthropologists and communities, and also just the kind of backpacking adventures as well in the meantime. And yeah, it was I'm so grateful that I had that experience, because it's a real privilege to be able to spend time studying a culture and then actually going there and experiencing it, but also being confronted by it, how different it was than it was in academic texts, and challenging myself in that way, but also learning about how others see the world. That's always something I'm so fascinated by. And so now I'm training in this kind of wilderness therapeutic practice. You can, till the cows come home, I can read about how it's important for us to be out in the natural world and how it's how we are nature. But there's a kind of element of going out and doing stuff that's needed to like realize your whole place in everything. And I can read all about that, but you can only really know the benefits by going and doing it yourself. So part of the rites of passage training that I'm doing, which is learning how you transform through going out into the wilderness with intentionality and kind of moving through to the next step in your life with intention. you can only learn how to facilitate that through actually experiencing it yourself as well. So yeah, I would always say that the experiential part is really important.
Yeah. Could you talk about like anything that you sort of, maybe expectations that you might have had from your academic learning that were sort of transformed once you went through the direct experience?
I think one thing that pops out to me at the moment is that I'd read all about the way that people relate to mountains and sort of ask for the consent of mountains to kind of climb them or work with them in the Andes. And I went out there with that knowledge, but also the kind of understanding that there's a lot of people that go out and they climb the mountains for a sense of adventure.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite know where I sat within that. And I went out to South America, and I realized I didn't actually want to climb the mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's actually directly answering your question.
No, it's great, but I love this concept of you said the consent of the mountain.
Yeah, asking, okay, well, because for other cultures, often, yeah, the natural world is it's animate and it isn't necessarily safe, and there needs to be a level of respect, and I think that's really important. And yeah, I think that also comes that knowledge comes from going out into the elements and having certain precarious wilder journeys as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can kind of relate to that mindset, why it is that certain peoples will think in that way.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that does kind of answer the question, because, you know, you sort of have these expectations of what's going to happen when you get there, and then you get there and you find out, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to climb the mountain. Maybe I'm here for a different purpose. Maybe I'm here for a different reason. Did it change for you on your backpacking trip? Like your purpose and sort of what you found while you were out there, did it change for you?
Yeah, I guess when I went out, I knew that I wanted to spend lots of time in communities and learning about ways that people saw the world. And yeah, when I was there, I think it gave me a sense of humility about my own privilege and about how I related to the natural world. And I witnessed how much respect and reverence there was for the land, yeah, in certain communities. And I felt like, wow, okay, that's something that I want to bring back with me and to foster and to develop when I come back to the UK. And I think that what the Wilder Journey stories actually echo some of that as well, because there are quite a few stories that were about how people gained a sense of humility from going out on this sort of grand adventure, and then actually learning quite hard lessons and realizing, okay, there's definitely humans need to step off the pedestal.
Yeah, totally. And so, I mean, I want to get into Wilder Journeys. You know, this is a collection of stories from a variety of people that most of whom have had some pretty epic adventures. And I think the thing is about like reading these stories, me personally, I know I find myself sort of living vicariously through them. Like, wow, like this is incredible. Like, I don't know if this is something that I could do. But then like when you actually go on the journey, you know, maybe you have this expectation based on what other people experienced, but you're finding that it's your own, like you're finding your own purpose for being there. You're finding your own reason for being there. So maybe those stories inspire you to go, but it's really up to you to have the direct experience and to find yourself when you're out there. So I'm curious, like, as you pulled these stories together, like, did you experience what I said that I experienced, which is that like that kind of desire to live vicariously through some of these stories?
Yeah, I mean, the whole sort of idea for the book and the purpose was from a sense of fascination of, yeah, I've always felt a call to the wild, so to speak, but I've never really dived in. I've been on many small adventures that fit round the academic studies and working, and I was curious. I was like, okay, to throw yourself fully in there, to live in the wilderness or to row an ocean, like what does that take, and what lessons do you bring back for the rest of us? And that was a curiosity, and I suppose also wanting to inspire myself to go on a similar journey and bring other people with me on that whole inquiry. So it's like, okay, what can I learn here and what might others learn? What I love about the outcome of it is that every single person I ask, oh, which was your favorite story? There's a different answer.
Yeah.
So people resonate and relate to the stories differently from each other. And yeah, I've had messages and also friends that have read the book and they've actually been inspired by one of the particular stories and have decided to do something different in their lives. And that brings me so much joy to hear those little anecdotes.
Yeah, Laurie, I mean, I feel you 100% on that. And that's, so much of what this podcast is all about for me, is, frankly, we've been going now almost 2 years. And I mean, one of the biggest benefits has been like the inspiration to myself to like continue to explore and go on adventures. And it's definitely an added benefit when I hear other people tell me that they've gotten excited and inspired to go do something. But it's kind of this double whammy of benefit, because it's like it fills me up, and when I hear other people get inspired, it's such an amazing thing. And this book, Wilder Journeys, has truly done that. Like, I've read it and I'm super inspired by the people that you've pulled together. So what's cool is you had this passion and this call to nature, to adventure. You're studying it, you're getting out there in it, but in the process, you've discovered that you have a gift for bringing people together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I that's something that I've really learned through this whole experience is how much I enjoy that as well. And bringing people together in a sort of sense of movement and collectivity and shared ideas and learning from each other. Like that's what life's all about for me. And Wilder Journeys has done that in more ways than one, because it's also the connections that have come out of the book that is amazing, not just the book. So if that makes it, I mean, the reason we're talking now is because of the book, right?
Right.
So I've met you, and you're a really cool person, and we can have this chat, and that's only like, it's a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
of the book. So it felt like just the book idea was the first domino, and now it's like going out of control in this amazing way, and that's part of the magic of life for me.
It is, Laurie. The feeling's mutual, and I call that synchronicity, what you just talked about. It's this like string of happenings that where one thing leads to the next. And it's when you trace these things back, it just truly shows us that everything is connected and we're all connected. Could you take us back to sort of the seed of Wilder Journeys and how this book came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was two years ago when I dreamed up this idea, and it almost was a kind of dream up idea. But I'll give you the kind of background context.
Yeah.
So during this summer, I just got back from living abroad, and I had suddenly had this realization of like, I really have a calling to do this work, which brings people and self-transformation and the natural world together. And I went on something called a vision quest, which is a 4-day 4-night fast, solo, in the woods. And I learned a lot about myself through that process, and I really found it an incredible practice for learning about our interconnection with everything. And so after that experience, I then went on a training in which I learned, actually with Rupert, who you have interviewed. I went on a training with Rupert, and we went off into the Lake District, and it was a day walk, and our inquiry was like, what are my gifts and who can I be of service to? And we had this same kind of method of going out solo and asking these questions and seeing what we saw, and that being information about what our gifts are. If that's clear.
It is. Can I pause you for a second? Because I know like me and listeners are going to want to know a 4-day, 4-night fast in the woods. What was that like?
Absolutely humbling and confronting and beautiful. Yeah, I felt like there was a shift within me during that time. Like, people get different things out of doing these journeys, but the main thing was that it was suddenly so clear to me what was holding me back from living my most fulfilled life, and that was very clear. And there was a sense of kind of life force that came back through me from that realization.
What was that process like physically? I mean, 4 days. So I'm assuming 4 days, no food, but you had water.
Yeah, I did have water. It was actually easier than I thought with the fasting. That was the kind of least of my concerns. The challenging part for me was the boredom, to be quite honest. It was midsummer in the UK and the days are really long, and we had no distractions out there. And I was alone with no one to talk to, no phone to go on, no place to walk to. Walking is usually my way of being out, but that's a very active thing. So I didn't have any energy to walk either, even if I could. So it was the sort of boredom that really got me. And that I think that sense of emptiness, you're empty of food, you've got little energy, you're on the edge, and emotions can rise much more easily in a way, and like thoughts and dream world and all of that is much closer to the surface. So you become quite sensitive and insightful. And the boredom is another. We don't allow ourselves to get bored enough in this society that we're now in.
Where does the insight come from?
I don't know. That's part of the mystery. But I like to think that there's this sort of connection between our own intuition and the outside world, and that we can tap into our own deepest knowing through having the connection with the outside world, and being like in relationship with it.
And was there a moment during that experience where there was like some sort of a release?
Yes, definitely. And the final night I went a bit mad, but yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I'd love to learn more about that. But we were talking about you and pulling together. So it was part of that experience where Wilder Journeys kind of.
So it was this summer. And then I was on a similar experience guided by Rupert, which was actually a training. And I realized that one of my gifts is communication. There was a moment where there was some grief about times in my life where I hadn't communicated very well or authentically. And that was feeling quite heavy, but then that sort of moved through me. And then I saw this communications tower, and that was like the final destination of my walk. And I could see the ocean. And like, that didn't necessarily make sense to me at the time, but when I got back to the camp, the guides reflected that back to me, and they were like, wow, that's, what your gifts are also your wounding. And there was some element of feeling wounded around communication, but in fact it's the gift and the gift of your life. So that might give some kind of insight to the listeners about what sort of experiences you get when you go on these sort of rites of passage solos, a bit like in the wild wellbeing workshops that I run, how you see metaphor and little clues everywhere in the outside world as you move through it with intention. So I had this thing I took away. It was like, wow, one of my gifts is authentic communication. And I'd also met Ros Savage, who has rowed across 3 oceans solo. And then because of my PhD interviewing foragers, I met Fiona Campbell, who'd walked around the world for 11 years. And I was just like, wow, I keep meeting these people with incredible stories. And one of my gifts is authentic communication. I wonder what's in all of this. And I guess it was just because of the experience of the Vision Quest. I was in this very open state of like in receiving of whatever was coming my way and just going with it. So one day I just woke up and it was literally, I think about 7 o'clock in the morning. I was just like, I'm going to create a book. And it's going to be written by all these amazing people that I keep meeting. And it's for myself and others to feel inspired. And more importantly, because I realized how important, being in the wilds and being on your own is for learning about yourself and also your relationship with the outer world and self-transformation. I thought, wow, there must be a lot of stories that these people have about those very topics. So it wasn't just an adventure story. My main brief to the authors was like, tell us about a time when you feel like something shifted within you and you had a big lesson to learn from one of your adventures in the wild. So that was kind of where the book idea came from. It's a long story, but hey, we got there.
So how did you go about the process of connecting with all these people? Were they people you'd already met, or were you kind of reaching out to people?
Yeah, it was kind of the domino effect again. So the first few people I told you about, I reached out to Roz and she immediately said yes. And I was like, right, okay, let's do this. And then I reached out to Fiona and unfortunately she didn't have time, but that led me to like search for someone else who'd like walked around the world. And I came across Angela Maxwell and she was also just like, yeah, I'm in. And I was like, okay, wow, this is happening. Now I need to actually do this. So I did a bit of research, but I also told everyone I met about this idea that I had, and they often gave me suggestions or contacts. And some of the authors, put me in touch with their friends. So Angela put me in touch with Carl, and Miriam put me in touch with Sophie, and it just sort of happened like that. And a few personal contacts like Hamza Yassin's a friend of a friend, and it just. Some people I found, like I read an article in Huck magazine about David Malana and his work with the surf school for people of color in the US. And I was like, wow, that is really important as well about representation. And that feels like a good thing to have in the book, and reached out to him and he was on for it. So it was a kind of quite random actually how it all came together, but really beautiful.
Yeah, totally. And just the way that everybody's sort of come together and rallied behind this. It seems like there's, for you, like this accountability that came with that first, like the first person that said, yes, let's do this. And then you telling your friends and telling people about it. It kind of almost like there's like no turning back at that point, right?
Exactly. And at the moment when I had a few different chapters in that people had submitted, I was like, okay, now I really need to find a publisher, because otherwise it's all in vain and they've wasted their time. And I was like, felt this sense of responsibility to them and also to myself, following through with an idea. At that point, I asked Miriam if she'd like to co-edit with me, because I felt like it would be good to have some support. And she was so enthusiastic, and I was like, yeah, sure, no worries, let's do this. And having her on board was just game changing. She's an amazing person and we work really well together. And that's part of the magical domino effect as well, is that I ended up going to Bulgaria because her and Jennifer, one of the other authors who met through the book, decided to do a Singing in the Wild workshop.
Nice.
And I was like, wow. And then Angela came, one of the other writers, and I was just sitting there in this group of people. There was 20 people that were actually there on this course, and they were having a life-changing experience. And I was looking at the three, Jennifer, Miriam, and Angela, and I just cried. I was just like, wow. Life.
Yeah, there's a great quote that you become the 6 people that you spend the most time with. I can't remember who said it, but you surrounded yourself with an amazing group. And I'm curious if you had the whole process sort of laid out in front of you, or was it more just about taking one step at a time and seeing how it unfolds?
Definitely one step at a time. Yeah, that's generally how I live my life. Yeah, get an idea and then go follow that thread and see where it leads.
So are you surprised at how it turned out?
I am really surprised because I'd never done anything like that before. I'm not a published author previously, or an editor, and I didn't know how the process worked, and I didn't know who would be involved and what it would end up turning out like. And it's just, it's been an amazing journey. And I think it was just meant to happen, and therefore it happened, but also with some luck and privilege.
So what are some of those, as I would say, synchronicities that came out of the book?
I think it was just the way that it all came together. Mostly the synchronicities of, like, it was a friend of mine that suggested that I reached out to Miriam. And when I reached out to her, she was like, oh, by the way, one day we can maybe make a film together with this filmmaker. And she like sent me the photo of my friend, and she hadn't known that he was the reason that I got in touch with her.
Oh, nice.
I was just like, what? Okay, this is one of my best friends, Miriam. And yeah, sure, I'd love to work with you together with him as well in the future. And we ended up going on a mountain trip a few weeks ago with him and his partner and myself, because I was like, I think these two need to meet, because I've been in touch on, like, she saved his email, and she says she doesn't usually save emails, but she got a good vibe or something and saved it for like years. And he was the reason that I was in touch with her. And anyway,
it's amazing.
That's one of the fun synchronicities. And I really love connecting people as well, as you've already said. And the fact that he'd actually never met her, although they'd been in contact via email a long time ago, I was just like, I need to make this happen. I need to get them together. And for me, once I got them together, they were sitting having deep chats while cooking on a fire in a beautiful mountain valley with a lake. And I just sat back and was just like, yeah.
I love it. Well, it's kind of like when you did Duke of Edinburgh, you said at the end, you kind of felt this sense of accomplishment. And I have to imagine that completing Wilder Journeys, you've felt a similar sense of accomplishment, and something to be really proud of. It's an incredible book. And I'm just curious, like, what lessons that you've learned about yourself, or maybe how you've changed in the process.
I guess it really gave me a sense of trust in myself, but also just in certain processes and ideas. Like, if you have a moment of inspiration, to follow that thread and not doubt yourself, because I could very easily have just gone, no, I'm not a published author. I don't know how this works. I've never done anything like that before. This is a mad idea. I'm not going to do it. And instead, just to be like, all right, okay, seems to be what's landed in my brain and my heart, and I'm just going to follow it and see what happens. And to be courageous in that and to follow those intuitions, it's like, yeah, that was really affirming for me. Also, I suppose more practically, my ability to coordinate a group of people to create something together, and to follow through with something like that. Yeah, I guess a lot of trust in myself, but also the wider journey of life.
Well, the thing about the book that's great, I think, for listeners is that it's certainly a book that you could just pick up and read cover to cover. But I think it's also something that if you wanted to, you could just read a little bit at a time, because it's all individual stories. And there's not just like essay-like stories, but there's also poetry. And so it's something that you could have by your bedside, and you could read a little bit as you go, or you could read it all at once. So I can't recommend the book enough. What's the best way for people to get a copy?
Well, they can go on our website, and there's a section called Buy the Book, and the website's www.wilderjourneys.com. And on the Buy the Book section, there's a whole list of different retailers, so they can choose which retailer they prefer.
Great. That's awesome. Well, I can't recommend it enough. For people that are listening that are curious about you, the work you do, and maybe want to work with you, can you talk a little bit more about your work and how people can connect with you?
Yeah, so I would love to hear from people if they want to co-facilitate something, especially wilderness therapeutic based. Also, if they're outdoor educators that run programs and they would like an outdoor educator to come along. I also have experience working with young people doing kind of wilderness practices like bushcraft and also reflective practices in nature.
Can you speak to bushcraft? Can you, just for listeners that aren't familiar with that term?
Bushcraft, yeah. So I guess it's kind of like wilderness living skills would be a best way to put it. Fire lighting, and basically making things from what the natural world around us provides, without needing to go and buy something or use plastics. Although of course there are tarps which are made of plastic, but that's creating a shelter, and there are various levels of primitive skill and then using sort of modern technology that kind of come into bushcraft. But most of all, it's just surviving as much as possible in the wild using the resources around you.
Love it. Yeah. So Laurie, we will make sure that we've got links in the show notes, of course, to Wilder Journeys, but we've got some other links, your Instagram and your personal webpage. We'll make sure that all of that is included in there. So listeners can go to the show notes to find all of that. I'm curious, for people that are listening that are hearing your story and super inspired by what you do, but I think you've said before that you kind of see yourself as a bridge between people that sort of want to get into the outdoors, but haven't really been able to find the sort of courage to do it. What advice do you have for those people?
I'd say just get started, follow the calling, and it doesn't have to be, walking the world. I'd say if you feel a call to learn about foraging or plants, then just try that one species first of all and learn that really well. For instance, I've been learning tracking this year, and I'm like suddenly so enthusiastic about tracking, and I want to learn everything there is to know about it, but actually my brain can't take on all that information at once. So I've started with deer tracking, and that is this year's challenge for me, is learning all about deer tracking. And it might be that someone wants to get out and they really like cycling and they cycle around their town, but they want to go on an adventure. So it could just be learning how to go bike packing for a few days and just, take it step by step. Or learning, if you're into foraging, learning 3 plants in a year and get really good at recognizing those plants.
So it's that one step at a time that we talked about. Just take the next step.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love it. Laurie, your story is incredible. I know there's lots more to come from you, but I also know that at some point Hollywood is going to find out about your story and they're going to want to make a movie about you. So I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actress that's going to play you in your movie?
Oh, I'd love to say something really quirky and cool, but I actually don't know much about Hollywood, so I don't have loads to offer. But people often say that I look a little bit like Amanda Seyfried in the Mamma Mia film.
Okay, yeah, I totally can see that. That's great. Love it.
So she would be fine.
Okay, perfect. And what's your movie going to be called?
Where I Belong.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah, I think that for me, there's always been a sense of like, how do humans fit in with the wider scheme of things, and how do we live well with other beings? And I've also had a personal inquiry of like, where do I belong? Is it in the mountains? Is it by the rivers? Is it everywhere? And so I think the film would have to have something about belonging in there.
I love it. Where I Belong, starring Amanda Seyfried.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us today. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Laurie's story has encouraged you to listen to that voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell, or you just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Laurie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Scott. Really nice to chat with you.